Hello, welcome back. If you watched my first video, thank you for coming back. I promised you that I was going to tell you exactly how I recovered today. And if you haven't seen my first video and you're interested in hearing what it's like to live with binge eating disorder and bulimia, we'll link my first video. You can have a watch. We're linking it there. Okay, so where we left off was that I was at the lowest of the low in my recovery. I felt like I had tried every conventional treatment and I felt that something was wrong with me because it just wasn't working for me. I had started to lose hope in recovery, and I'd also started to lose hope in living a normal life. When I thought about my future, I felt depressed because I thought that I wouldn't be able to have a family and have kids because I knew the nature of this disorder was that it interfered with your everyday life. And it was at the point where it was interfering with everything that was meaningful to me. I had a friend in a recovery group who knew that I was at an all-time low, and she said to me, "Ellie, why don't you just come over to my house and I want to give you something." She gave me this book. It's the most unassuming cover, nothing fancy, plain and simple. And when she gave me this book, I thought, I really didn't have faith that a book could help me recover. I had read every book under the sun on eating disorders, and I thought that it could tell me nothing that I didn't already know or nothing that I hadn't already tried to help me get better. It's called Brain Over Binge by Katherine Handsome, and she really had like a similar story to me, just a messy eating disorder. I think hers was a form of exercise bulimia. And again, similarly had tried all the conventional therapies and just felt like she could not stop this cycle of binge eating. And similar to me and probably many others, she felt that something was deeply wrong with her and that the binges were really out of her control. So she was told in recovery that she binged to cope with negative emotions, difficult life circumstances, and that really she just had to get to the root cause or the hidden cause of her binging, and once she addressed that, the urges would go away. And what I've come to realize since then is although painful life circumstances might be the reason that we start binge eating in the first place, it's not always cyclical causation, meaning that pain in life isn't always the thing that maintains the cycle. Okay, so in the book, she talks about how, I'm just gonna put my coffee down, guys. She talks about how she stumbles across this man called Jack Trimpe, depends whether you're French or Australian. I don't know how to say his name. And he is this clinical social worker who specializes in addiction, and his understanding of the brain is insane. And he talks about how when we have addiction, it actually stems from the lower survival part of our brain. So this is the part of the brain that is responsible for generating your biological survival instincts and drives. For example, food, water, sex, oxygen. This part of the brain is automatic and this part of the brain is irrational. It is deep in the brain below the wrinkled outer layer, which is the, I can't remember actually, is the subcortex. Some scientists like to call this the animal brain. In Catherine's book, she calls this the lower brain. So the lower brain ensures survival, but sometimes it mistakenly treats addictions like they are essential. So Trimpe calls this voice from the lower brain the addictive voice. So he encourages drinkers, he specializes in alcoholism, but he encourages drinkers to observe any thought, feeling, or desire to engage in drinking as the addictive voice, and any thought, feeling, or hope of quitting as their true self. Katherine explains that when bulimics do this and genuinely detach themselves from the addictive voice, which comes from the lower brain, that recovery becomes effortless. So the real you is located in a different part of the brain. It is in your prefrontal cortex. Now, this is the most uniquely human part of our brain. This is what separates us from animals. This is where we experience our identity, our ability to be self-aware, our ability to reason, and our intelligence. It also controls voluntary actions like moving our hands, our mouth, and swallowing. And Trimpe says that our lower brain can't force us to do anything because ultimately our prefrontal cortex controls voluntary movement. Now, if you are anything like me, at this point you will want to tap out because you think, oh, you're talking about self-control. I have tried self-control for years and it doesn't work. Well, I felt the same. Keep listening. Trying to fight or engage with the addictive voice is useless because it comes from the part of the brain that actually doesn't even have the capacity to reason. It's irrational in nature. It can't listen to you. Like Catherine, this theory made sense to me because it explained why one part of my brain really wanted to engage in the binge eating, but the other part of my brain desperately wanted to quit. So I had these two conflicting brain functions going on. The urges feel so irresistible because it makes sense to believe that they are really coming from you. Catherine talks about in her book how she spent years of her recovery trying to make her binge urges go away, and I can certainly relate to that. But she said this was mind-blowing to her because suddenly she didn't have to try and make them go away, she didn't have to fight them, but she could just learn how to react differently to them. When she started to observe her thoughts, feelings, and desires like urging her to binge, she started to observe them and consider them as separate to her, coming from her lower brain as just like neurological junk, and she was able to separate herself from them. And she said that something remarkable happened. The binge urges just went away. She stopped believing that her binging had any deep, significant need or signified an emotionally unmet need, and she started realizing that she binged simply to cope with the urge to binge. She realized that her binging was just a habit, and this would later become profound to me, the idea that I binge only to cope with the urge to binge, or in other words, I used to binge to cope with the discomfort of an urge. So the prefrontal cortex is the most powerful part of the human brain. This is the captain, this is the chief executive. This gives us the ability to inhibit other areas of our brain. So this is what separates us from animals. We have the ability to stop, think, and redirect urges, which is insane. This is what, what's his name? Gregory Richardson. I don't know, I'm gonna tell you in a second what his name is, but he calls this free won't. Okay, so everything I just said, I tried this, I read this book and decided to put it into action. And I'll tell you exactly how later, because Catherine in her book actually conceptualizes using your prefrontal cortex into 5 steps. I think they're amazing. I'm gonna tell you how to do it a little bit later in this video. But I tried this. After reading this book, I had my first urge to binge, and I tried separating myself from the urge and like thinking of it as all coming from my lower brain as neurological junk. I separated myself and identified with the higher part of my brain, the prefrontal cortex. And I remember that the binge urge just went away, like reasonably quickly. But of course, you guys, I knew not to get my hopes up. I had tried that many things in recovery that I still wasn't sure that this would really work for me. So the next day, I had another urge to binge, and I implemented Catherine's 5 steps. I did the first step, the second step, the third step, and then the binge urge went away. And in that moment, I knew that I had recovered for life. This had never happened before where something had just worked this easy for me. I remember calling my mum randomly. It's funny the details you remember. I remember she was in the hairdresser and I called her. I was like, Mum, I haven't binged for 2 days. I got this random scientific book about the brain and blah, blah, blah. And she was so excited for me. I remember on my way home from work buying a block of chocolate and eating the first row and then just not feeling the need to binge, not feeling the need to eat anything more. I remember that same week going to the beach for the first time in years and actually just enjoying it because I wasn't obsessing over food or scared that I was gonna binge. I remember hanging out with my brother and his friends and having so much fun socially for the first time in years. And yeah, I just remember that was like my honeymoon recovery summer because it was at the beginning of spring when I recovered. And I just have the sweetest memories of that summer for the first time feeling like I was free. I also wasn't scared that the binging was going to come back. I knew that it was done. Yeah, it was the best feeling in the world. Okay, so in this video, I will quickly walk you through my experience of the 5 steps of using your prefrontal cortex to stop binge eating. But I just want to make it clear that this is not my own work. This is the work of Catherine Hansen. And if you do struggle with binge eating, oh my gosh, please pick up yourself a copy of this book because she goes into great depth explaining the science of why and how these steps work. So the first step is viewing your urges to binge as neurological junk from your lower brain. Now, it is very important to view your urges to binge as meaningless. You can't view them as important or like they're signaling an unmet emotional or psychological need. You need to view them essentially as faulty messages from your lower brain not worthy or not requiring any attention from you. So to do this, I took Catherine's advice in the book and I let go of any recovery ideas or misconceptions that I had learned that I binged to meet an unmet emotional need. She said that if she believed that her binge urges signaled something deeper, that just would have been an excuse for her or her lower brain to justify her continuing her habit. And once you label your urges to binge as meaningless, they lose their intensity. Step 2 is separate your higher brain from your urges to binge. One of my favorite things that Catherine says is that your urges to binge aren't truly yours. You are not your habit. If you have struggled with binge eating or any type of addictive behavior before, you would know well that experience of duality, feeling like one part of you desperately wants to engage in their behavior, but another part of you just as desperately wants to quit. So that other part of you that wants to quit, that has goals in life that aren't aligned with binge eating, and also that regrets every time you have a binge, that part of you is your higher brain, your prefrontal cortex. That part of you is the true you. So my prefrontal cortex and your prefrontal cortex are completely separate from where your urges to binge come from. It's not until you really experience that separation of your higher brain from your binge urges that you are able to say no. By being an observer of your urges rather than getting emotionally caught in the middle of them, they become less intense and you get the sense that you're above them. It's important to note that this technique does not directly translate to anorexia because the role of the prefrontal cortex in anorexia is very complex. So if this is the issue you struggle with, I do recommend seeing a health professional and particularly someone who specializes in anorexia. Now, something else this book talks about is that it is so essential to see your prefrontal cortex as powerful. If you see it on an even playing field with your lower part of the brain, you wouldn't be able to separate yourself from those urges. Once you distance yourself from your urges, you're able to stop paying attention to them. And attention, of course, is vital to neuroplasticity. So when you give attention to your urges to binge, the neural activity that produce them increases. When you don't give attention to them, the neural activity decreases. And the interesting thing about attention is it can be positive or negative. So even when you're giving your attention negative urges trying to fight them, trying to make them go away, and at the end of the day, that is still attention and it can still strengthen those pathways. So step 3 is stop reacting to your urges to binge. Now, once you have separated yourself from your urges to binge, stopping to react to them becomes much more easy. I remember when I used to get urges to binge, I would emotionally react to them. I would get angry. I was angry that they had come back. I was frustrated that they wouldn't go away. And I was frustrated because I felt like I used to think they're not going to go away until I binge. So reacting to your thoughts and urges unfortunately only makes them more intense and more upsetting. When you stop reacting to your urges, they become less intense and they lose their emotional charge. So you can go about your day without them having to be a big deal. You don't have to try and fight them or wish the urges away or figure out what the trigger was. You just go about your day without reacting to them. This component also involves giving up the notion that you need to change or fix something as soon as you get a binge urge. Binge urges aren't always contextually dependent, meaning that it doesn't matter what circumstance you're in, you can practice not reacting to your binge urges. Okay guys, we are almost there. Step 4 is stop acting on your urges to binge. Now this is obviously possible by taking the first 3 steps. Your habit cannot make you do anything. So the way that you quit binge eating is by stopping acting on your urges, one urge at a time. Now, this doesn't require you to find the perfect alternative to what you're doing to find a good distraction or do journaling or something. Now, you can do those things, but you can also just continue on your day as normal and not act on the urge. And what you'll find is that the binge urges disappear over time. So I think in this book, it took her about 3 months for the urges to disappear. But for me, my brain changed really quickly. So I had those 2 urges that I told you about. And then I did not have an urge to binge for about 5 or 6 months. I had at that time, I had one more binge about 5 months after I first recovered. But I didn't panic about it because I remembered how to use these tools. So I used them and then I have not binged again since. Now that was about over 8 years ago. And so the final step is celebrate your success. This is my absolute favorite one. This is a natural result of when you don't act on your urges. Trust me, when you have for years tried to get rid of your urges and fight them, and all of a sudden you learn that you don't have to panic when you get an urge, you don't even have to fight it, you don't have to give it attention because it's neurological junk, and then you don't act on it. That is the most exciting thing in the world because you know that you have just beaten a binge, you don't have to engage in it. It's not uncomfortable, you don't have to panic. And also just the excitement of knowing that in the future, you're also not gonna have to act. That's how I felt, and I remember being so excited. Now, obviously what you give attention to strengthens. So when you get excited, it actually speeds up your recovery process. And so I remember, it sounds weird, but I used to look forward to my binge urges because I knew that every time I got a binge urge, that was an opportunity not to act on it. And I knew that every time I didn't act on it, there was a less of a chance of that urge coming back. And that was true. Today, I don't even experience binge urges because my brain has literally forgotten, like they never come up for me. But if I did, I wouldn't panic because I have the tools to know how to deal with them if they come up. Now, it's important to note that these techniques are for someone who is eating adequately. And by that, I mean getting enough energy intake and nutrition. Because if you are starving or restricting yourself, then binge urges are actually an adaptive survival response. But on the other hand, if you are eating adequately and don't have a restrictive mindset, which is a whole nother video, then binge eating urges are a maladaptive response and you can employ these techniques. So in future, I will do some shorter videos maybe on each of these components and how I practically applied them. But I also can't wait to share with you some other techniques that I learned in therapy, which really helped me, such as intuitive eating, mindful eating. I can't wait to talk about body respect, because sometimes I know that learning to love your body feels like the most overwhelming big step, but we can at least start to respect our bodies. Also talking about like enjoying exercise again and enjoying it for every other reason than the way that it makes you look, because it has so many wonderful benefits. I also can't wait to have a chat about cultural body ideals. I think that these change like the wind. They change as quick as fashion does, which is so strange when you think about it because our bodies do not change that quickly. Our relationships with food are so nuanced, so I can't wait to go into depth with you on some of the thinking patterns that we have when we make food decisions. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to come along for more of the journey, like and subscribe. And next week, I can't wait to tell you about a little love of mine called intuitive eating. But until then,